How do you do? This is Bob Leslie, WWJ-TV, and this is Profile. Profile of Mr. Jamison Handy, founder and president of the Jam Handy Organization of Detroit and of the world. An organization celebrating its 50th anniversary, and one which established in Detroit the first talking picture studio devoted to the making of educational and industrial motion pictures. Jam, for Jamison Handy, was born in Philadelphia in 1886. Since early youth, he has devoted himself to education, wholesome competitive sport, and supporting the tenets of spiritual faith, helping churches regardless of creed. Well, Mr. Handy, your pioneering in the field of visual education has won you countless citations from our armed services and our government for your help in 3 major wars. You've been cited as a star salesman on many occasions. Your Olympic prowess as a swimmer is well known and outstanding. But most recently, you must have derived much pleasure in this proclamation declaring last November 27th to be Jam Handy Day in Detroit, and I hold here a copy of it, signed by Mayor Louis Miriani.
It was embarrassing, but enjoyable.
Well, congratulations, Dick. And I thought that instead of defining the whereases, this is what we'll try to bring out as you and I sit and chat for this hour today. Mr. Handy, let's go back to the beginning, if we might. I mentioned that you were born in Philadelphia. How much life of your, or how many years of your life were spent there?
Well, I think about 5. My father was an editor in Philadelphia and had ideas. He tried to promote in Philadelphia the idea of celebrating the 400th anniversary of the discovery of America. Philadelphia was, it said, not so progressive in those days, and Chicago was a very progressive city at the time, almost a frontier town in terms of that century. They were receptive to the idea and asked him to come out and promote the idea there. So we went to Chicago, and being 5 years old, I decided to go along with it, or concurred in the decision.
Concurred in the decision, your vote being one of some 7 children in the Handy family.
I was the youngest
right?
of 7 children, with 4 years between me and number 6.
Well, that's an interesting spread. I wonder if this at times gave some inspiration to your determination to make communications as simple as you seem to have been bent on.
Frankly, they talked, and I didn't know what they were talking about. It was, so I was given to understand, an educated family, and most of them were writers, all but one, helping to earn the family living in one way or another. And they talked a lot, and I didn't know what was going on up there. So I became much interested in the general subject of communication, especially from the receiving end.
As a matter of fact, I think I read where you had 2 sisters in particular who did a reasonable amount of experimenting with you as the subject on progressive education.
I think I was their laboratory, and they had differences in their ideas as to how learning should be done. The one sister was a disciple of Froebel, and she was going to kindergarten college as a spare tire in case that she had to earn her living in a different way, don't you know? The other was going to the Francis Parker School. Francis Parker School, its central idea, so far as I could see, was progressive education, allowing each student to go at his own pace. And the kindergarten idea was to, to let the learner have some fun out of it while learning.
And this I hope
so there was quite a lot of argument, and I was a guinea pig for them, yes.
Now then, let's get back to Dad for a moment, if we may. Your father's name was Moses Handy, isn't that right?
Moses P. Handy, yes.
He was a newspaper publisher, but had quite a reputation as an after-dinner speaker and toastmaster, didn't he?
Well, a newspaper editor, yes. And he was, socially minded. He had started the Clover Club in Philadelphia and was one of the originators of its successor, the Gridiron Club in Washington, where he had been the toastmaster and the griller, shall we say, or at least the master of ceremonies. He liked a good dinner, and he had to go to many banquets. So he would come home to have dinner with the family. He was a family man before he went to the banquet. And usually he would bring with him the guest of honor. That was particularly so in Chicago. And there we had as visitors many of the diplomats whom he had met in Washington when he was a Washington correspondent of the Chicago Tribune, and visitors who were in various activities, and particularly businessmen who had problems in those days. We were in the period of the first series of consolidations, those that on which J.P. Morgan was the spark plug, shall we say, or the catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
So they talked over their troubles, the troubles of communication and large organization, getting the people to understand why their businesses existed, why they had a job, how the job should be handled, why the invention, if it were an invention, had been made, how to get things working and how to keep them working, how to get understanding, in other words, and the training job done. So at a very early age I became interested in that, and the more so because I wasn't allowed to talk. Each of the children was allowed to ask questions.
I see.
The number 6 was allowed to ask 2 questions. I was allowed to ask only 1.
They were almost out of questions by the time they got down to you.
Right. But one question, even though I may have learned to make that leading question, like how did you make such a success, Mr. Carnegie, or how did you get along so well with in the development of your business, Mr. Armour? Even with tricky questions of that kind, I didn't learn all I wanted to.
Mr. Handy, speaking of your early education, I'm told that you finished both elementary school and high school in some 8 years. I think 5 in elementary and 3 in high school.
Yes, that's true. My progress was accelerated, well, first by the fact that I spent my first 3 years at the exposition. 1 year while it was being built, 1 year while it was open, and 1 year while they were tearing it down.
And of course, this is
looking at the exhibits.
World's Columbian Exposition,
That's
which
right.
finally came to be.
And I learned by looking and by reading the little captions under the exhibits, and that sort of thing.
I think your father agreed, as a matter of fact, that was a top-rate education in itself.
Well, he was committed. I had read some of his promotional material, and it said it was going to be an educational exhibit. And I said, well, why can't I get my education there? And I got first permission to go there for a year. I was just about to go to school, and then I managed to run it into 3 years. So I got into school and got a running start, and they were glad to get rid of me because I wanted to teach the teachers how they should teach. And teachers don't always like that. At least they didn't.
No, I'm told they sometimes frown on it.
Well, particularly if it's coming from a 9-year-old.
Yes. Mr. Handy, let's come back to later education, when you attended the University of Michigan.
Well, I didn't attend for too long there. I had 2 ideas I tried to sell. One was the idea of democracy. I'd read and heard something about that as being the general policy in the United States. I didn't think that fraternities were democratic. So I organized with somebody else as a leader, did a bit of ghost writing for him, shall we say, a good popular student, to make a crusade against fraternities. So I became known as an agitator. Then I hadn't entirely overcome, by any means, my notions as to the improvement of the entertainment and the speed with which learning could be accomplished. An experiment was made by Professor Trueblood in dramatizing his lessons, acting out the situations which were described, either historically, he was fond of historical romances, or otherwise, allowing the students to participate in the learning process. Well, that was my dish. And I was a correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. The university was rather diffident and had a wary eye on what Professor Trueblood was doing. They weren't entirely proud of it, but although he was, he instructed the correspondents, there were 2 of us in the class, that he didn't want any publicity on this. Well, I'd been grown up in a family of journalists, and the public has the right to be informed. So as soon as that first class was over, I ran. I was a candidate for the cross-country team anyway. I ran the 1.5 miles down to the telegraph office and immediately filed a query on it.
Would you say that this was approximately at the time when you and the University of Michigan parted company?
Well, soon after that. It was after the paragraphers throughout the country took it up. After McCutcheon made a cartoon in which they took liberties with Professor Trueblood's name, called him Professor Foxy Truesport. Many of these clippings were commendatory, but most of them were, had entertainment values, shall we say. And so that I was invited to go elsewhere, and I was found that word of my radical ideas, should we say, or my agitations to change the processes of education, make them a little bit more democratic and more in line with what the students, who were outnumbered the faculties, would like to have. In spite of the popularity of some of my ideas with the students, I found that I wasn't popular as a student, and I was turned down by 8 other colleges.
Oh, I see. And did you at any time go back to school thereafter, Mr. Handy?
No, I didn't. I went for 2 weeks to the University of Pennsylvania. I was a native of the state of Pennsylvania, and they received me. But after the 2 weeks, being put under pressure from, they asked me if I'd like to leave, and told me that gentlemen didn't stay where they weren't wanted, and succeeded in making me miserable enough to communicate it to the Chicago Tribune. Medill McCormick, who was then publisher of the Chicago Tribune, said, "Come back here and I'll give you as good an education as you could get in any university."
And this is precisely what you continued to do for a number of years. I was most interested in hearing of a story of an editorial, I believe, that you wrote when you were 19 years old on the subject of education, which found its way into the Chicago Tribune. Does this ring a bell?
Yes, the chief editorial writer was on his vacation, and Bill Hard, now on the staff of Reader's Digest, was in charge in his absence. I'd been making a little extra money by writing some editorials on the side, and I wrote one questioning the Chicago policies, that is, the policies of the Board of Education, in that they didn't have enough pictures in the textbooks, and said that they were already abreast in some classes with John Comenius, who 400 years before had put the first illustration in a textbook, and that maybe in 400 years we should have learned to put 2 or more into a textbook.
Well,
from that standpoint.
Some progress, I think you'd agree, at least has been made in the years that have followed.
Oh, indeed, yes. But the Board of Education didn't like that, and they didn't like it any the better when they found that a 19-year-old boy had written this editorial.
Was that the end?
So they wanted me expelled, but Medill McCormick appealed to their sympathy and explained that it was done while the chief editorial writer was on his vacation. I was allowed to stay in my new school.
Mr. McCormick, Medill that is, who later became the United States Senator, was a man with whom you must have had a very close personal relationship.
Well, I did. going and coming, I was under instructions to ask for a new job every time I felt I knew the one I'd been given on. That was part of this education. Of course, I speeded that up, and in the vacation season, I'd have, 8 jobs during 16 weeks. And I always thought I'd learned them in 2 weeks. Maybe you were young once and know what young people are like.
Yes, I remember vaguely.
I had exaggerated ideas, so I was always ready for a new job.
Mr. Handy, I'd like to bring something up now, which I think is coming close to what later became the development and the establishment of the Jam Handy organization, and your conviction of the power of speaking with the eye, so to speak. Someone told me that the display advertising in the paper was not getting all the results it might have for the merchants, and that you decided to look into this, and I'd like to know what you found out.
Well, we had half the circulation of the daily news. And it was difficult to keep the advertisers in the daily paper, partly because their ads in the news were read because the news carried more of them, and partly because the circulation was half the news. All those circulations weren't public information in those days, not public even to the people who bought those circulations. But we tried a number of ways to make that advertising paid. We hired copywriters, we used illustrations, we provided services of various kinds, and the improvements were slight. It occurred to me finally, at that time I was assistant advertising manager in charge of retail, that if the salespeople knew more about what was being offered in the ads, that possibly they might be more enthusiastic and more informative when they were asked questions. So I went around to buyers and found out what's good about this merchandise. Why is it worth what's asked? Has it anything about it that's superior to other merchandise? And then I got permission to carry that information to the salespeople. It wasn't long before this secret weapon, the Daily News didn't know what we were doing, was working, because this enthusiasm and this information on the part of the salespeople put us in a position where we could sell the same merchandise, similar merchandise at the same prices, dollar for dollar for the Daily News, even though we had only half the circulation.
Mr. Handy, I would like to begin to get into the whole aspect of audio and visual education and selling, if I may say so. And two of your very earlier associations, and I'd like to know the method you used in those days, I believe were with the National Cash Register Company as well as International Harvester. Isn't that right?
Yes. The International Harvester Association came about from the fact that people wouldn't come to see their merchandise. We had, by that time, were extending our sales promotion methods on the Chicago Tribune to information on for national advertisers, retailers. The equipment which the International Harvester Company made couldn't be put into the counters, shall we say,
surely,
or exhibit. You had to take the prospective buyer, or rather, I should say, you couldn't take the prospective buyer to it, generally speaking, and show it what it was good for. You had to take it to the buyer.
Well, was this then when you devised the rather large slides that you first began to use?
No, our first method was demonstration.
I see.
To train the salesman to take them out to the farmer and show the farmer what they do for him. It was an extension of the principle we'd used at retail, and it worked effectively. As for John Patterson, he was making a new appliance, an office appliance, a cash register, particularly a store utility that also called for demonstration, and he was far ahead of anything that I knew anything about, because I thought in terms only of informing and enthusing. And he thought in terms of demonstrating. In fact, the harvester company people thought I was smart because of what I learned from him, and he thought I was smart because of what I was learning from the harvester people.
Turn about.
Right from that standpoint. But he believed in visual communication in an elementary way. He used matches to represent people. He'd lay them down on the counter in order to hold the attention of the person whom he was talking to. And from that he got into making glass slides of these matchmen and their relationships as suggested by the little match figures that he'd laid out on the horizontal plane. Started making slides, and with the inspiration of the so-called Chinese picture language of some 3,900 characters they were supposed to have at that time, he started making a library of slides of all the various relationships in which people could get in selling situations, particularly, but also human relations of every kind. And of course, that was tinder to my flame. He had 25,000 slides, a library, with which he would illustrate talks that he would make.
I think, Mr. Handy, you once said that what goes in one eye doesn't go out the other.
And generally, I think that's a true statement, yes. Of course, it's put the emphasis on the fact that we can't so well depend on the ear, or depend on the ear alone. I believe in ears. I wear them. And I notice that other people do and make use of them.
Yes, they hold my glasses out very well, too. Well, Mr. Handy, the Jam Handy organization, a lot of us think of in terms of motion pictures. But actually, again, to get to the wider aspect of visual education, won't you tell us a little bit more about the functions of your organization other than just motion pictures?
Well, I believe in motion pictures, but the motion pictures I believe are the motion pictures in people's minds. And the motion picture, as we term it, that is the cinema, is merely a means of putting motion pictures in people's minds. Now, there are many more economical and faster ways of inducing pictures in people's minds than by means of motion pictures. Motion pictures may be more vivid, they may be more specific, they may be more stimulative from an emotional standpoint, they may be more realistic. But if you're dealing with familiar situations and you can talk in terms of the previous experience of the people to whom you were talking, and can make that sufficiently vivid by, well, still pictures or even by words without pictures, it's far more economical.
Of course.
So that only about a third of our work is in the motion picture field. The rest is verbal in terms of talks, illustrated talks, yes, and dramatic productions of one kind or another. We produce live shows, and in fact, we are at times the largest employers of theatrical help, should we say,
yes,
in the country, because at times we have as many as 14 road shows out at one time.
I wonder if I may ask you to do something for me, Mr. Handy. You, on your garment, have no outer pocket. And I'm familiar with why you have your suit tailored without it, but I think it's an interesting story, and I'd like you to share it with our audience.
I don't think I'm peculiar in this, but, well, let's put it this way. Temptation is hard to resist. At least I find it so. And when I had a pocket there, I was inclined to put things in it. It's the easiest pocket to reach with my right hand. I did that. So I had a way of putting things there. And they interfered with what I'm most interested in, which is maintaining attention and keeping interest on the thing that you're talking about.
In other words, the concentration on communication, whereas I might be watching your pencils instead of listening carefully and watching you.
Right, and I had particular weakness. Because I used to, on a blackboard or on a chart, as we call it, these turnover charts, I would use green and red and black, and sometimes a fourth color, to emphasize or give special significance to particular points that I was making. Sometimes those are symbolic, such as green for something good to do and red for take it, go slow.
Danger
and
zone.
that sort of thing. Well, a convenient place to have those pencils so they didn't slow me down in the flow of my conversation or my presentation or communication was in this pocket. And they would take attention when I didn't want them to take attention.
And
so to remove temptation, I had my suits thereafter made without that pocket.
I suppose for similar reasons, I have come to learn of certain wardrobe do's and don'ts that your freelance actors and performers and so forth are asked to cooperate with in Handy productions. Such as, I believe, one time the button-down collar was taboo. I think you discouraged the use of the bow tie when it perhaps was not widely worn. And at one time, I think you would have preferred an actor without a mustache rather than with one. Am I right, sir?
Yes, and that is all based on the same idea. It's difficult to keep your own attention on what you're talking about and stick to the subject, let alone to have your hearers stick to it, and anything that is conspicuous. Now, there may come a time again when, when smooth faces or upper lips are conspicuous. But at that particular time, mustaches were conspicuous and they were distracting. So far as the wardrobe is concerned, we do recommend to speakers, executives, if they have a communication job, we suggest that they have a tie that be not conspicuous. Sometimes it's conspicuous, to have a tie the same color as your suit. In fact, I think we're pretty close to that time now.
Yes.
But I had a fancy at that time, personally, for silk ties, and I had quite a collection, variety of them. I had the experience of talking to a sales executive and presenting to him what I thought was a very good recommendation, suggestion for the solution of the problem. And when I got through, he said to me, Jam, I was on a first name acquaintance with him. Well, I think I may say it was no less than Tom Watson Sr. of the IBM.
Oh.
He said, Jam, would you mind starting all over again? I have been so interested in that beautiful tie that you're wearing that I haven't heard a word you've said. Well, I decided that I would leave my colorful home ties at home.
That was the end of your
Yes,
collection.
I had a sofa cushion made out of.
Mr. Handy, I'm very much interested in something, too, that you were obviously a pioneer in, and that was the documentary film. And I know of your attraction to the kind of man that Tom Edison was. And I recall that you had a great deal to do with the presentation of one of the early documentary films on his life, didn't you, sir?
Yes, I learned a great deal from Tom Edison. I wrote a page story on him, one of a series of interviews that I had with business leaders and outstanding personalities of that time, particularly inventors, people of new ideas. Really following up some of these suppressed desires that I'd had at my father's family table when I was an infant. I sold the Tribune on letting me do a series of that kind in which I could ask the questions. I didn't tell them that I hadn't been allowed to ask when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10 from that standpoint.
Well, sure.
So in interviewing Tom Edison, I learned a good deal, and I wanted a third helping. So I went down and to find out what he then considered his greatest invention. And after showing off my previous knowledge, I discovered that it wasn't at all what I thought, that instead of it being the motion picture or the phonograph or the electric light bulb, that he thought his greatest invention was the central service station from which an entire community or city could draw power, electrical current. Well, I dug up a lot of other things that were surprising, and among them was his concept of the motion picture. And I discovered that he had originally intended that invention to be as an educational tool, and that he had envisioned a transformation in our schools. And he was living without that realization of his dream, and suffering as from the disappointment of seeing it being used for entertainment, which at that time, well, times hadn't changed too much, was devoted almost exclusively to love, murder, mystery, crime, and sex that isn't crime exactly, well, that sort of thing, and he was disappointed. So I immediately thought, well, I wonder if I couldn't save this daughter of yours from the life of shame into which the motion picture industry has led her.
And the perils of Pauline.
And all that sort of thing. And why not have some factual films? One of the earliest was a documentary, a life of Thomas Edison.
And as a matter of
in
fact,
the silent days.
wasn't Pancho Villa another of your subjects, sir?
Yes, pursuing factual films and looking for some excitements in it, we and using the Tribune to promote them on a participation in the rentals basis, we sent a correspondent down there to talk to Pancho Villa and to get the inside story from him of why he should behave the way he was behaving, how he got that way, and talk to him sympathetically. And he allowed us to take motion pictures. We brought them in and we circulated them in the theaters, and that way broke new ground. We at that time, however, had already pioneered the Seelig Tribune News Weekly, which was a presentation of factual material in the theaters. And with the pressure of newspaper publicity, we had demonstrated that people were also interested in the facts of life as well as the facts of life as they, quote, unquote,
Yes, unquote.
presented them.
Mr. Handy, you have, during your very, very interesting and colorful and productive years in this business, done so many things. I'd like to ask a question, and I mean not to be a provocative one necessarily, but if you and I were to meet on a train or today possibly in a jet airplane and we got to chatting and I said to you, Mr. Handy, what do you do? How would you describe your occupation?
Well, you might have something entirely new, and I might hear something entirely new. I experimented along that line once. It is a difficult business to describe because we set out to accelerate the processes of education, and we interpret that term very broadly, and also to make them more pleasant. I always loved to learn what I hated to study. And I thought there might be a lot of other people like that. So I could describe our business in terms of, well, I could just use that phrase. What we do is accelerate education. The chances are I'd get some more questions. I've discovered that. Or I might say our job is to make education painless. That also has the disadvantage of being an interesting statement that leads to another question.
That is an interesting statement because a number of years ago you made one very close to that, I think, when you said that education should be a pleasure and not a pain in the head.
Pain in the head. And it can even become a pain at the neck if you let that headache continue long enough. That's as a matter of fact. Well, I once gave myself the challenge of stating that differently every time.
This question of mine, you mean?
Yes,
someone
short
would ask
question.
you?
What business? Giving a different answer each time. At the same time, see that answer was explicit, that it was true, and that it was succinct. And for a whole year, I stuck to that resolution. Every time I was had a seatmate on a plane. I fly about 75,000 miles a year. Have for, I suppose 30 years. I would give a different answer to that question. I even made the game harder for myself by always asking my seatmate what's his business, so that he would have to ask me. And you know that for that entire year, and I suppose I must have answered the question, well, at least 180 times in the 360 days that I was moving around on trains and planes, I gave a different answer every time, and it was a true answer.
Well, of course, I'm not surprised
Each time.
Mr. Handy, there are so many interesting facets that I want to be sure we at least touch on this afternoon. And you pointed out earlier that you came from a family of 7, and of course I know that Mr. Jamison Handy has a family of his own, but I don't know what it numbers and what these people do, and I'd like to hear a little bit about them.
Well, I have 5 of them, and none of them are in my business, excepting that one of my daughters earns some extra money by teaching in class, elementary school. I have another son who is a business executive. He's been a salesman and a sales manager. I have one who has no use for business. He thinks it's a pain in the neck. And I have I have a daughter who's given me grandchildren.
Wonderful.
And as a matter of fact, a great-grandson.
You're away from home, as you pointed out so much, that I'm told that Mrs. Handy has made up for some of the lost time when you didn't go back to the University of Michigan, and has a kind of hobby of her own of going to school.
Well, she likes continuing education, and I think I finally sold her on education. Maybe I didn't. You know, women sell themselves and sometimes can let you think you've contributed to their education. Sincerely, and maybe you have a little bit.
Hope so.
But about 10 years ago, she started going to college. She's slightly my junior, but not very much. And she's been going to college ever since, although she's earned a sabbatical holiday. And she's not going to college this semester, but she's gone to a number of colleges. I am away from home, but she will come and stay with me. There's a commitment. She always keeps it. Any time I stay in the same place, we'll stay in the same place for 2 weeks. That seldom happens. I'm going to be in Detroit all this week, but that puts her pretty well in the clear.
Well,
on the other hand, it interrupts her education. We went to summer school at Columbia one year, and I think it was about an 8-week term, and I complicated things by staying here for a couple of weeks. So out of the 8 weeks, she missed 2, but she succeeded in getting an A. I'm quite proud of that.
I would be indeed.
On a condensed or fast course.
Mr. Handy, a while ago when you were relating how you did a little fast cross-country work to get your story to the Tribune on the occasion of the demonstrations at the University of Michigan.
Running downtown to the telegraph office.
Yes. I related this, however, with another sport in which you have participated with outstanding success, and I'd like to talk about your swimming. I'm especially anxious to because, if I may, and I'd like to read a little bit that was printed in the Illinois Athletic Club's tricolor on its 45th anniversary, when Commander Francis McDermott wrote as follows. In August of 1907, our tank opened, and among the swimmers we had Harry Hepner, Perry McGilvery, and Jamison Handy. Only one of them had a reputation at that time, Handy. He was truly a one-man team. He's the only man in the history of swimming in any AAU association to hold every championship, 50-yard, 100-yard, 220, 440, 880, and the mile, 150-yard backstroke, and 200-yard breaststroke. He held the Central Association championships both indoor and outdoor for several years, and you're still going at it strong in the swimming department, aren't you?
Well, I still swim daily, 500 or 600 yards. I like to pull water around and work my body through it.
Well, you're not likely to volunteer this information, so I want to tell, if I may, this myself, that Mr. Jamison Handy was elected to the Swimming Hall of Fame just last year in 1960. And you were the 23rd to achieve that distinction. Again, our congratulations.
Well, that was most largely for my contribution in devising new techniques in swimming. As a matter of fact, it's a mistake to think of me as an athlete, because I won my championships and broke my records largely with my head. The head is quite important in swimming, and one of the techniques which I have advocated is using the head physically in swimming more, as the fish and the porpoises do. And we're getting pretty good acceptance of that, although we still have a way to do. But my records and the versatility to which you apply there, the fact that I won, was due to the fact that I got pushed around. The minute I would develop a new technique and break the records, some of these long-geared fish, some of these talent whose hands were farther from their heads when they're stretched out, that is, visualizing the end, you start with your feet and you touch with your hands, they took those records away. So I had to move in another territory and make another change. So I went from one device to another. That's how I happened to get into breaststroke. It was all based on notions. We used in the breaststroke then a side kick like this. Well, these muscles aren't as strong. They don't get as much practice as you're running. So I just changed the kick pull that way and broke the record. They were using in the backstroke, they were using both arms together this way. I used them one at a time like that, and that way avoided the loss of momentum and broke the record. But as soon as these talented long-geared fish, particularly the basketball potential, should we say, started to use those techniques, they broke my records. Many of them didn't stay on the books more than a year.
Well, I think one remarkable achievement that Robert Ripley had occasion to publicize, as a matter of fact. Of course, it's well known, I think, that you were a member of the U.S. Olympic swimming team when you were quite a young man. When was that, Mr. Handy?
1904.
Mm-hmm. And you were then in what event?
I was in the quarter-mile breaststroke and in the half-mile and in the mile.
Now, it was not on that subject that Mr. Ripley found it so unusual and therefore reported it. What was more amazing is that 20 years later, you were again representing the United States in the Olympic team.
Well, I represented the second time. I represented America as one of the broken-down swimmers. You know what the broken-down swimmers are?
I'm afraid not.
They're the water polo players.
Oh.
So the second time I went back was the water polo players. And that was partly the realization of expressed desire, because I'd been selected for the 1908 team, but my employers thought I'd made all the contribution I should make at that time, and they didn't get a chance to go. So with that disappointment, I wanted to find some way in.
They wanted you to show up at the
office.
office.
I got just ahead of somebody who has duplicated my record, at least technically, by making the team 28 years apart as a yachtsman.
Oh. That's very interesting, Mr. Handy. There was something else that I wanted to ask you. Precisely, and you say you travel so much and swim daily, I want to know why swimming attracts you.
Well, from the standpoint of efficiency, I can use every part of my body, which is difficult to do without a hockey team or a basketball floor, shall we say. And it's something that you can do alone, although it's fun to do with other people. But I can get all the activity I want, get my arteries all flushed out, and use every finger that I have and every toe, and get a lot of action in a short time. And I can do that in 10 minutes, and if I have company, so much the better, but I don't have to make an appointment to do it. And I can do it when I get off an airplane at 11 at night or at 5 in the morning if necessary. So I carry a swimming suit with me.
I was going to say it'd be a safe guess to assume that you have a quantitatively adequate wardrobe of swimming suits.
Well, I have a few, and I have a light one that I can put in a matchbox. It fits very nicely into my bag. I carry a bag nowadays.
Mr. Handy, there's another facet too that I'd like to go back to a bit. It has to do with the days of your creative writing, when you collaborated on the production and the writing of a couple of plays for the legitimate theater. And I think you worked in hand with J.P. McAvoy, wasn't it?
On one of them, yes. And that was on one called the Comic Supplement. It was a failure. It was a predecessor of Little Abner, shall we say, from that standpoint. I also worked on made some contribution to the Fourth Estate and the Little Brother of the Rich,
And these
which were by Joseph Medill Patterson. I've always been interested in the drama. As we mentioned, I was thrown out of school because of my enthusiasm for the drama, and one of the jobs I had was as a critic. But for some time, I edited the dramatic supplement of the Chicago Tribune, which we syndicated. So in that connection, had the opportunity to interview and ask their reasons for success of some of the leading showmen of that time, such as George Cohan, Barnum, whom I knew previously as a child, had gone. He was a Philadelphian, as you know, the circus manager. But Schubert and Ziegfeld, I had an opportunity to ask each of those men my leading question that I found so productive when I was 7 or 8 years old of what is the reason for your success, and what were your experiences before you became so successful?
Most interesting, and that's why we're so gratified to hear some of yours today, Mr. Handy. Your background has included a rich spiritual experience, and it came to my attention some time ago, in fact, that in the offices of the Jam Handy organization on the boulevard and elsewhere, when a caller there, salesman or whatever he is there to tend to, is awaiting his appointment, there is, in addition to up-to-date periodicals, the Holy Bible.
Yes, we didn't originate that practice, and I think we have to respect and pay tribute to what the Gideons have done in that. But we believe in putting the hay where the horse can reach it, if it has nutriment in it. So we make the Bible available as well as current publication, so that anybody who is interested in an instruction book of that character that may have the answers to some of the problems of life, help people to get along a little bit better, it's available to them.
Well, I'm sure that it has given you inspiration because of something that I read from your own pen, when you mentioned that one of the earliest inspiration for audio and visual education was propounded by Jesus himself.
Well, I've tried to learn from other people, and I steal neglected ideas and help promote them. Our ideas are nearly all ideas for helping other people get their good ideas across. Jesus made motion pictures. I speak in reverence, even though I speak figuratively, as he usually did. He made motion pictures in people's minds. He talked in terms of images. He used the familiar language. We're told that he spoke in the Aramaic and not in the Hebrew. And always in terms of things that people could visualize. The parables, of course, are outstanding. He also used exhibits consistently. We know how he held up the coin. We know how he used the child and brought him in to illustrate, to show what he was talking about, but always talking in terms of something which could make a picture in the mind. I say always, maybe I shouldn't say that, but familiar. And seemed to be rather effective, There are those of us who would like to see the golden rule adopted more widely than it's adopted, including more definitely than it may be, I mean no disrespect, utilized by you and by me.
But Mr.
in
Handy,
spite of that, there's been a lot of progress, and it's been the most successful, I shan't call it organization, but the most successful doctrine, I'd say, in the history of the world.
yes, in your own writings, I have learned that you feel that there is great place in industry and business and so forth for the application of the golden rule.
That's right. Particularly, we can make a little more progress in at least improving the techniques of not kicking the customer in the face or kicking him in behind after he's gone, if you pardon me in delicate expression.
You will. Mr. Handy, we were talking in some generalities about the films that you prepared for the armed forces. I'm wondering if presently the Jam Handy organization is continuing to do any work for the services.
Yes, of course, it's no longer the 97% that it was during the war, but we are continuing to make instructional materials and patterns for procedures for new types of planes, and also some instruction materials on missiles and basic information, educationally presented, audio-visually presented, on the technical sciences underlying modern warfare or defense, should we say.
You know, we're going back a bit, but on the same subject. In World War I, the then Secretary of the Interior, Franklin Lake, I believe.
Lane. Franklin Lane.
Was responsible for, I think, persuading you to accept a $1-a-year-man appointment of great use to the government in the subject, or on the subject, of the then illiteracy situation and its relationship to the importance of our pursuing World War II.
Yes, it was a tough situation we had, and the situation was almost as bad, or half as bad, should we say, during World War II. We had a problem of teaching numbers of new skills in the critical trades to a large number of people who weren't able to understand words in the language. In fact, the draft army in World War I, was so illiterate, 24 7/10% of the draftees couldn't pass the literacy test. And those tests were the ability to write a letter home and read a letter from home, or read the headlines on the newspaper. They couldn't tell. And those people we had to train not only in the arts of war, but in the production of war materials. And it was mechanical war. We were already into machine guns, depth bombs, and torpedoes, mechanical devices. We had a language problem from a foreign language standpoint, also a sort of a Tower of Babel we were building. We referred to America as a melting pot, but there wasn't much melting yet. In Detroit, I think at that time we had 3 or 4 foreign language newspapers, and we had 11 of them in Chicago.
How many different languages do you suppose were spoken in those days in a
I did a
cosmopolitan
story
center
on
like
it
that?
for the Chicago Tribune.
Is that so?
Wrote one. And I discovered 118 dialects that were spoken which couldn't be understood by others. A number of them were different Chinese. There was any number of those things. All the different types of French. You see, we didn't have much travel. We didn't have radio. We didn't have television. We didn't have much reading, and so people couldn't understand each other's languages. They couldn't read the safety instructions, let alone the instructions how to use the machines or protect them from abuse.
Yes. What were some of the devices that helped you accomplish their orientation, Mr. Handy?
Pictures in the form of posters, supplemented by words, similar to those benefit? Well, we had in the World's Columbian Exposition, showing them what we were talking about and a few simple words underneath. Sometimes we'd put those in 2 or 3 languages, and according to where the factory was. In other words, what the prevailing language was spoken. I mean, they would be in German down in the Cincinnati area, and they were in German up in Milwaukee. And they might be Bohemian out in Omaha, as I recall it at that time.
I know in World War II you received from the President of the United States a certificate of merit for similar work, but I dare say that in that era you found considerably less of a problem of illiteracy.
Yes, we had different standards. The standards then of literacy, or the test, was the 4 years attendance in school. In other words, they had to be through 4 grades. If they'd had 4 grades, they were literate. And as I recall it, the figure then was up to, the illiteracy figure was 11.2, 11.2%.
Well, that's a very gratifying change.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Indeed it is.
Yes. The country has been, well, should we say, homogenized, standardized, and people not only speak English, but they understand the words. But I still am of the opinion that it's good to stay in the 1 and 2 syllable words unless you're talking to people whom you can depend upon to get along pretty well with an occasional 3 syllable word.
You practice what you preach. As a matter of fact,
frontline words.
Isn't this why, probably, Mr. Handy, so many of your films can be absorbed and digested educationally wise in many foreign countries?
Yes, we translate them, but we still hold them to simple words which can be understood by those of limited vocabulary. And if anything important, it can be expressed in short words. Even today, some of our best speakers use short words. Have you ever heard what Churchill has to say about short words?
Not specifically that I recall.
Well, he improved on what Lincoln said. And you know Lincoln's Gettysburg Address has what? 3, 5, 7, you tell me. 2 syllable words in them, and those easily understand. Churchill said something like this: all my life I have made my way with words. I know words. I speak them, and they write them, and I write them. Of all the things I know about words, one thing I know, it is best for me to know. That is that the short words are best.
Thank you, Mr. Handy.
Every word of that's a 1 syllable word.
Indeed it is. Well, I'm afraid that we have to call this wonderful visit to a stop. This has been Profile, a visit in depth with Mr. Jamison Handy, founder and president of the Jam Handy organization. We hope his many services and ideas will continue for many, many years. This is Bob Leslie speaking.
Pretty good.
Oh, I enjoyed it.